All right, so we've already covered behavioral observation measures and individualized rating scales. Now we've only got a couple more left to cover, and one of them is standardized measures. So standardized measures, as opposed to being something that's customized specifically to the client, it's something that's already validated, shown to be reliable, something that's measured, and something that's commonly used in practice because we know a lot about the research behind it and the psychometric properties. So with a behavioral observation measure or an individualized rating scale, we just create these with the client, right? We look at what their problems are, we come up with a good measurement and recording plan. But with a standardized measure, they're already created, right? So where can you find them? You can look online. PsycInfo has some good ones. You could find some on Google Scholar. I'll put some other references online for you to check out. Also, the library or agencies that you might be working at probably have some. So every agency I've ever worked at has had some kind of standardized measures available to the clients. And a lot of times the agencies that you work through really want to see that there's some outcomes or that there's some progress made. So it's in their best interest to see you using standardized measures. So when you're selecting a standardized measure to use, you want to figure out something that is related to the purpose of what you're working on with a client. So if you're using a depression scale, you could use the Beck depression scale with a geriatric client. But maybe depression looks different for geriatric clients than it does for adult clients. And same thing with kids. If you're working with a kid, you wouldn't want to use the Beck Depression Inventory because depression looks different in kids. So I'm going to show an example of a geriatric depression scale, a standardized measure. Okay, so this is the geriatric depression scale by Sherry Greenberg from the Hartford Institute of Geriatric Nursing. So you can read more about this. I'll post this up online. But if we're looking here, we can see that the target population is for healthy, medically ill, or mild to moderately impaired, cognitively impaired older adults. And you can see that they talk about the validity and reliability here. It says the GDS was found to be 92% sensitive and 89% specific. So that means that 92% of the time, if somebody is depressed, this measure is going to pick it up. But it's also got 89% specificity. So that means it's not going to pick up depression when really there's anxiety or adjustment or something else going on. So the validity and the reliability of the tool have been supported through clinical practice and research. They've compared it to the long and short form of the GDS, and it looks like there's about an 84% overlap. You can see the correlation coefficient is 0.84. And you can just see that the strengths and limitations, the GDS is not a substitute for diagnostic interview, but it's a good starting point. So it's kind of like a screening tool for depression, and it doesn't assess for suicidality. So we can look at some of the items here on the geriatric depression short form. So whenever you see short form used, that means that it's not a full-on diagnostic tool. It's something that's shortened that you can use in practice or for a single system design. This one only has 15 items on it. So are you basically satisfied with your life? Have you dropped out of activities? Do you feel that your life is empty? Do you often get bored? Are you in good spirits most of the time? So a question to you, does this seem like it has good face validity? I would say yes. All these seem to look like they're measuring depression for geriatric clients. And so then what would you do with this? How would you score it? And you can see that there's some description of the scoring cutoff for this measure. It says the answers in bold indicate depression. Score 1 point for each of the bolded answers. So if you've got a score of above 5 points, it's suggestive of depression. 10 or more is almost always indicative of depression, and anything over 5 should warrant a comprehensive assessment or a follow-up assessment. And this scale is public domain, so what that means is that you don't have to pay to use this. There's some measures that are private and you have to pay for each administration of it, but this one's free for anybody to use. All right, and when you're choosing a standardized measure to use, again, thinking about reliability and validity here. So reliability is the consistency of the measure to give consistent results every time it's used. And validity is the accuracy of the measure. So is it going to be covering what you want it to cover? Is it going to be covering the full concept? Is it going to have multiple dimensions to it that are going to really get at depression or anxiety or whatever it is that you're really trying to measure? So again, you want to pick something that's got strong indications of reliability and validity. But you also want something that's going to be easy to use. So you can find a measure that's really, really valid for measuring depression. But what if it's 450 items, like the MMPI? I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with the MMPI, but that's a really, really commonly used research tool or measure that's used by psychologists a lot to measure people's personalities or depression, anxiety. But it's not something you could use for a single system design, because if you're only meeting with somebody an hour a week, it's going to take 2 hours to administer that MMPI. So you want to choose something like the short form geriatric depression scale. It's only really going to take a couple minutes to fill out. Accessibility, again, some measures are free. Geriatric depression scale was free. You don't have to pay for it. If something on Google Scholar says it's for public use, you don't have to pay a single thing for it. But if it's going to be something that's going to cost you money, you might want to see if it's something that your agency is going to provide for you. Because especially for something like a project like we're going to be doing for class, you don't want to be paying for something because there's so many free measures and tools out there that are reliable and valid. Okay, and so cut points, I talked about this with the geriatric depression scale. It says 5 or above might warrant depression, 10 or above always is indicative of depression. So that's what a cut score is. So if you see something that says the cut scores for this measure are 5 or above or 10 or above, you know that that means that anything that is beyond that cut score is indicative of a clinical presentation. And so one last thing about this, some of these measures are screening measures. So the geriatric depression scale was a screening measure for depression. If somebody scored above 5, they would screen in. Diagnostic measures might be something more like the MMPI. So the MMPI is couple hours long. It's a full-on battery of looking at a plethora of different things about a client's personality and background to give you a fuller picture of their entire presentation. Assessment measures, again, might be something like an IQ test because you're going to be assessing for somebody's cognitive impairment or cognitive functioning. So for your single system design for your project, you're going to be wanting to choose something that's a little bit more abbreviated, short, and easy to use. All right, so just one last thing about standardized measures. I've talked about this a little bit before, but in looking at sensitivity and specificity, you may have heard false positives, false negatives. So when somebody's creating a measure for looking at depression, we want it to be sensitive enough that if somebody does have depression, that it's going to pick it up, but if they don't have depression, that it's going to screen them out. The issue with this is that sometimes people don't have depression, but they'll screen into it, which is a false positive. And the flip side, obviously, is if they do have depression, but they don't screen into it, then that's a false negative. This is just a breakdown of what that looks like. And ultimately, what we're trying to do with decreasing type 1 error and type 2 error, which is false positive and false negative, is we want to make sure that we are catching as much of a condition that is actually there and not screening something in that isn't actually there. And that's one of the big benefits of standardized measures, is that it already is a lot of research on this. All right, so your practice tools for this week is the geriatric depression scale. It's going to be posted up online. Also, maybe a couple links for other places where you can find standardized measures. So for your project, you're going to have to use 2 different types of measures, and standardized measure is sometimes one of the ones that people use. So I'm more than happy to help you try to find one that'll be useful for you.